She opened the door, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "You're late," she said. I smiled, heart pounding. Worth the wait? It had been years. Enough time for the street to change, for the hedges to grow taller, for her to forget, maybe. But as I stood at the gate of her house, hands deep in my jacket pockets and rain soaking into my shoes, I wasn't so sure she had. I hadn't planned what I would say. Only that I had to see her again. The house looked the same. A small front porch with ivy creeping along the railings. Wind chimes hanging limp in the still air. Light glowed from a window upstairs. That familiar amber hue, warm, lived in hers. I took the 3 steps up to her door and raised my hand to knock, but I didn't get the chance. She opened it before I could touch it. As if she'd been waiting. She stood there, leaning slightly against the frame. Her arms were crossed, not in anger, more like defense. Or hesitation. She wore a slate-gray cardigan draped over a black shirt, her hair loosely tied back in that same effortless way I remembered. A few strands clung to her cheek from the rain in the air. And her eyes, still impossibly calm, still seeing more than they let on. "You're late," she said. 3 words. Cool. Controlled. But something flickered just under her voice, something uncertain. I could have apologized. Explained. But instead, my smile found its way through the nerves tightening in my chest. "Worth the wait," I said. She didn't smile. Not fully. But her lips tugged in that way I remembered, the almost smile she gave when she was unsure if she was ready to feel something again. There was a pause. A pause long enough to feel like a verdict. Rain tapped against the porch roof in soft rhythms. I held my breath, not knowing what came next. Then, wordlessly, she stepped back and opened the door wider. The warmth inside hit me immediately. The scent of something herbal, bergamot tea, probably. The soft hum of music from another room. Her world still intact. Still beautiful. I stepped inside carefully, like entering someone else's dream. She closed the door behind me with a soft click. She didn't ask why I came. Not yet. And I didn't offer it. There was too much between us, old conversations left hanging, emotions that had hardened into silence. But in that moment, the distance between us didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a tightrope. Fragile. Suspended. And somehow still holding. I looked at her, really looked. Time had deepened the lines near her eyes, softened the curve of her jaw. But she had never been more stunning. Not because she was trying to be, but because she wasn't. And as she walked ahead of me into the living room, I followed. Quietly. Willingly. Like someone finally returning to where they'd always meant to be. She poured the tea slowly, like she needed something to focus on. The kettle hissed behind her, steam curling into the air like a sigh. She moved with that quiet elegance I remembered, every gesture precise, contained. Like someone who never let emotion spill unless it was invited. She placed the mug in front of me, her fingers brushing the rim as she slid it across the table. A muted blue ceramic cup, I remembered those too. "I haven't changed the kitchen much," she said, settling across from me. "Didn't see the point." I nodded. My fingers wrapped around the warmth of the mug, but I didn't drink. "Still feels like you." She gave a small, tired smile and looked out the window beside us. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, blurring the world beyond the glass. There was a long silence. Comfortable in shape, but sharp underneath. Then, quietly, she said, "Do you remember that last night at the gallery?" I did. I remembered all of it. The way the lights glowed low as we closed up. The smell of oil paint and citrus cleaner. How her hand brushed mine when we both reached for the same key. And how we didn't pull away fast enough. She stared down at her tea. "You were 21. I was 40. I thought I could draw a line and keep it clean." Her voice softened. "I should have known better. I was old enough to know what I felt," I said gently. "And young enough to leave," she replied, meeting my eyes. No bitterness. Just truth. I wanted to argue, to say it wasn't that simple. But she wasn't wrong. I'd gotten scared. Not of her, never of her, but of what it meant to feel something that real. At that age, it felt dangerous to want someone so deeply. So I disappeared. I didn't call. I didn't come back. Until now. I thought about you, I said. A lot more than I let myself admit. She tilted her head slightly. Then why now? I looked at her, at the soft shadows under her eyes, the way her collarbone peeked out from the neckline of her sweater, elegant and unguarded. Because you're still the only person who ever saw me, I said. That landed. I saw it in the way her fingers tightened on the cup. She didn't respond right away. Just lifted the mug to her lips, held it there, then set it back down. I used to imagine what I'd say if you ever came back, she murmured. None of it sounded like this. Disappointed? I asked, half smiling. Her eyes lingered on mine. No. Just surprised I still feel anything at all. The air felt heavier after that. Not uncomfortable. Just full, like neither of us knew what to do with everything we'd kept quiet for so long. The tea had gone cold between us. But the room had never felt warmer. It happened in the middle of a sentence. She was telling me about a new exhibit she'd helped curate, some up-and-coming artist with a thing for brushstrokes and silence, when the floor lamp in the corner flickered then died. She paused, mid-sentence. Damn thing, she muttered, rising from her chair with a sigh. It shorts out whenever it feels like it. I stood, brushing my hands on my jeans. Let me take a look. You don't have to, I want to, I said, already crossing the room. She didn't argue, just watched as I crouched beside the lamp. The base wobbled a little, and the cord was loose near the switch, just like I remembered. Some things never changed. I rolled my sleeves up. The metal was cold under my fingers, and the bulb was slightly warm. I jiggled the cord gently, felt the flicker surge in the wiring. Nothing dangerous, just stubborn. Like her. She stepped beside me, close enough that I could smell her. Jasmine and clean linen, and something faintly herbal, probably whatever lotion she always used. Her presence filled the air even though she didn't say a word. She crouched down beside me, knees cracking softly. There's a screwdriver in the kitchen drawer, she said. Third one. I reached for it, and as I came back, my arm brushed lightly against her leg. It wasn't intentional. But it wasn't nothing. The fabric of her trousers was soft, something inky and smooth, and her body didn't flinch. I felt her warmth through the sleeve of my shirt, just for a second, just enough to know she didn't move away. She handed me a fresh bulb, her fingers brushing mine in the pass. I held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, something silent passing between us. When I turned back to the lamp, I could feel her still watching me. I pretended not to notice, but every nerve in my body was aware of how close she was. How the space between us had shifted. Thinned. You always were good with your hands, she said quietly, with a tone I couldn't quite read. Some things you don't forget, I replied, tightening the last screw. When I tested the switch, the light blinked on, soft, golden, warm. We both blinked in its glow, caught in it like moths. I stayed crouched a moment longer than I needed to, not ready to move. She didn't get up either. We were suspended there, side by side, either of us knowing exactly what came next. Then, finally, she stood. I followed a second later. Thanks, she said, brushing a hand through her hair. That lamp's been half dead for months. I looked at her, the way the light softened her face. Maybe it was just waiting for the right time. She didn't smile. But she didn't look away either. Something small had shifted. And we both felt it. She asked me to grab some tape from the sideboard drawer. A simple request. Something small. Harmless. But drawers are funny things. They hold more than what you're looking for. I opened the second one, the old one with the brass handle, and there it was, not the tape, but a photograph. Slightly curled at the edges. Faded, but not forgotten. Us. It was taken at the gallery. I remembered the exact night. One of the last ones we worked together. She was in a pale blue blouse, laughing at something I'd said. My arm was halfway around her back, hers resting lightly on my shoulder. We were too close for two people pretending to be just co-workers. My chest tightened. Not from regret exactly, more like a sudden awareness of everything time didn't manage to bury. She walked in behind me. Saw the photo in my hand. I turned to her slowly. You kept this? She didn't answer right away. Just took the photo gently, almost reverently, and looked at it like it was something fragile. I thought I'd thrown it out, she said softly. But I could never quite let it go. I watched her as she stared at that frozen moment. Her thumb gently brushed the edge of the image, like she was tracing the outlines of a memory she wasn't sure she was allowed to revisit. Why? I asked. Not accusing, just needing to know. She didn't meet my eyes. Because forgetting doesn't work when part of you still waits. Those words sank deep, into the part of me I'd tried to silence for years. The part that still remembered the way she smelled in the morning, the curve of her laugh, the steadiness in her when everything else felt uncertain. I stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. She didn't move. I reached for her hand, the one still holding the photo, and wrapped my fingers gently around hers. But she pulled away. Not sharply. Not in anger. Just carefully. Like someone who wanted to believe but couldn't afford to hope. Don't, she whispered. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered with something raw. I nodded. Okay. We stood there for a moment in silence, both of us holding pieces of the past we weren't sure how to carry anymore. She placed the photo back in the drawer. Closed it. The storm rolled in faster than either of us expected. One moment, the windows framed a quiet gray afternoon. The next, thunder cracked above the house like a warning, deep and rumbling. Rain smacked against the glass in urgent rhythm, and wind curled its fingers around the eaves, rattling the windows. She lit a candle in the living room. Then another. And another. The soft, golden flicker danced across her face, catching in the hollows of her cheekbones, warming the silver strands in her hair. She looked different in candlelight, not younger, not softer, just realer. Like the version of her I remembered from all those late gallery nights. The version she only showed in stillness. I always like storms, she said, settling into the couch. They clear things out. I stayed standing near the window, hands in my pockets, watching the world disappear behind streaks of water. I could see our reflections in the glass, mine standing, hers seated, two outlines suspended between now and then. I didn't come here to stir everything back up, I said finally. But I had to see you. Even if it meant nothing came of it. Her eyes lifted to mine. Then why did you come? The words settled between us like dust. I turned to face her fully. Because I never stopped thinking about you. The thunder was quieter now. Just a low growl in the distance. I thought about the way you made coffee, I continued. The sound of your heels on the gallery floor. The way you used to hum under your breath when you were lost in a painting. You probably forgot all that. But I didn't. She looked down, fingers gently rubbing the edge of her sleeve. You were just a boy, she said quietly. Maybe, I said, crossing the room. But I'm not now. I sat on the edge of the couch, not too close. Just near enough that I could see her face clearly. The way her jaw tightened. The way her eyes flicked toward mine, then away again. I didn't know how to stay back then, I said. But I do now. Silence stretched, taut and humming. Then, gently, I reached out. Just a hand. No pressure. She hesitated. And then let hers settle into mine. Her skin was cool at first, from the tea mug she'd been holding. But it warmed quickly. My thumb brushed the side of her palm, slow, instinctive. She didn't pull away. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. Do you have any idea what it cost me to let you go? I met her eyes. Probably as much as it cost me to walk away. For a moment neither of us spoke. The storm outside had softened, but the one between us wasn't finished. I leaned in slightly, not kissing her, just close enough that she could feel the breath between us, if she wanted to. She didn't close the distance. But she didn't move away either. I woke up with a crick in my neck and the faint scent of jasmine clinging to the air. The living room was hushed in that early morning kind of way, still, quiet, pale, with the first hints of sunlight bleeding in through half-closed curtains. The candle from last night had burned out completely, leaving behind only a pool of wax and the faintest trace of smoke. I blinked slowly, unsure for a moment where I was. And then I felt the warmth. She was there. Asleep beside me. Not tangled around me. Not even touching, really. Just close. Her body slightly curled, her arm folded near her chest. The kind of closeness that speaks not of desire, but of permission. The kind you don't rush. She looked peaceful. Not distant, not guarded like she had been all night. Just resting. Real. Her face softer somehow in sleep, like the weight she carried had finally stepped off her shoulders for a little while. I didn't move. Just lay there, watching her breathe. It struck me how long it had been since I'd seen her like this, uncomposed, unguarded, without the armor she'd learned to wear so well. A loose strand of hair had fallen across her cheek. I wanted to reach out, brush it back, feel the shape of her skin under my fingertips, but I didn't. Instead, I let the moment settle. Quiet. Honest. She stirred minutes later. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for the briefest second, she looked at me like she didn't remember. Then recognition bloomed, and she gave a slow, tired blink. "Morning," she whispered, her voice still dusted with sleep. "Hey," I said softly. She sat up carefully, brushing her hand through her hair and glancing toward the window. "What time is it?" "Still early." I sat up too, stretching a little. "I didn't mean to fall asleep." She gave a faint smile. "Neither did I." I followed her into the kitchen. The floor was cold under my bare feet, and the house still smelled faintly of last night's rain. She moved around the space like it hadn't been years, as if nothing about this morning felt unusual. But it was. Everything had changed. She handed me a mug of coffee, strong, no sugar, exactly how I used to take it. I didn't ask how she remembered. We sat at the small kitchen table, the same one we'd sat at the day before, but the silence now was different. Warmer. Not waiting to be filled. She wrapped her hands around her mug and looked at me. Not with suspicion. Not with fear. Just with the kind of quiet clarity that only comes after a storm. "You came back," she said. "I did." She nodded. Then, slowly, she reached across the table and laid her hand over mine. No drama. No words. Just contact. Steady. Warm. And in that one gesture, I felt more forgiveness than I could have asked for. And my bag was by the door. It wasn't much, just a small duffel with a few clothes, a book, and a plane ticket back to the life I'd been living before I came here. A life that felt smaller now. Lighter, but not in a good way. Like something important had been left behind in it. She stood across from me, arms folded, her shoulder leaning lightly against the doorway. Same as that first moment when she'd opened the door. But this time, the air between us wasn't filled with questions. It was full of possibilities. "So," she said softly, "what now?" Her voice held no pressure. Just openness. Like she wasn't asking for a plan. Just honesty. I ran my hand through my hair. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," I admitted. "Honestly, I didn't even think you'd let me in the door." She gave a quiet laugh, short, but real. Neither did I. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It just was, like both of us needed a moment to really feel what was happening. I took a slow breath and stepped toward her, holding out my hand. Not dramatically. Not as some sweeping romantic gesture. Just a hand. Open. Simple. "You tell me," I said. "Do I stay?" She looked down at it, her eyes scanning my fingers like they held more than flesh, like they held years of hesitation, and hope, and the risk of disappointment all over again. And maybe they did. For a long second, she didn't move. She just stood there, breathing, thinking. I could see the war in her expression, the logic, the fear, the ache of wanting something and not knowing if she was allowed to reach for it. Then, without a word, she slid her hand into mine. Her fingers curled gently, but firmly, no hesitation in the grip. She didn't say, "Yes." She didn't say, "Stay." But she didn't let go. And in that quiet, simple decision, everything changed. We didn't kiss. We didn't rush into promises. But the way her thumb moved slowly across the back of my hand, that said more than words ever could. We stood like that for a while, just inside the doorway. Rain tapped gently against the window panes again, softer now, like the storm had finished its work. She gave my hand a slight tug, a small gesture that said come in, not goodbye. So I left the bag by the door. Left the ticket in my coat pocket. And followed her into the next room. This time, not as a visitor. Not as a memory. But as someone she was willing to let back in. Slowly. Gently. For real. "It's not just about you coming back," she said quietly. "It's about whether I can trust myself not to fall again." And I understood. Every word of it. Because some wounds don't scar. They just stay open, quietly, beneath the surface, waiting for the same hand to come back and either heal them, or hurt them again. The tape never got found. We didn't finish whatever task we were doing. But something important had been uncovered. Not just the photo, but everything it meant.